Hello, fancy folks. Dr. Lex here, host of LuxeSci, and I realized recently that we are deep into our third season of the podcast, and I don't think I've ever really shared the LuxeSci origin story and the reasons why I started doing this podcast in the first place. So I'm coming to you with a little in-between episodes drop of the origin story of LuxeSci. As with many podcasts and other artistic endeavor, this one started during the pandemic. I was looking for a creative outlet and a way to combine my two biggest interests, science and basically anything fancy. Some of this goes back to always feeling a little bit out of place as a kid, a little too nerdy for the fun fashion set, and a little too fashiony for the serious scientific set. As an aside, I have been asked why I used to dress up so much for scientific conferences. I've fully embraced my luxurious nerdiness now, and I know that 1, science and art are not separate worlds but coexist and influence each other in beautiful ways, and 2, that there are more scientifically fashionable, curious people out there besides me. And it's been one of the best parts about the podcast to discover people like myself who like fancy things but want to know how they work. And while personal interests and healing old torn identities and creative outlets during a pandemic are great reasons to start a podcast, I have to admit that I did have an ulterior motive. Maybe that sounds a little too sinister. Not an ulterior motive, an hypothesis. Somehow, all that training 2 times in grad school, it makes it so that the scientific process never fully leaves you. And I still run experiments at home and at work, though now without the beakers and the chemicals and the parasites, because nobody wants parasites at home. So what is this experiment? As with any good scientific method, you start with some background. So trust in science is not in a good place in the US. According to a Pew Research report published in November of 2023, 57% of Americans say that science has a positive effect on society. And while most politicians would love a 57% approval rating, this is down 8 percentage points from November 2021 and down 16 points from the beginning of the COVID pandemic. Distrust has also grown. 27% of Americans say they have not too much or no confidence in scientists to act in the public's best interests, and that's up 12% from 2020. There's been a lot published about the reasons for this growing distrust. Miscommunication during the COVID pandemic has been cited as a cause. While the communication during the pandemic definitely could have been better, this for me underscored a deeper root cause, the general lack of understanding of science and what it takes and how it's done among the general public. And that makes sense when you think about it. Do you really need to know the laws of physics that govern everyday life to go about your daily business? No, not really. And while it can be tempting to say we need better science communication, and we do, simply throwing facts at people has not demonstrated an increase in trust in science generally. A survey of 705 people in the US suggested that education about science does not improve trust in science. So why a science podcast? While simply trying to educate people about science may not impact trust, the survey suggested that intellectual humility was linked to increased trust in science. Since science can go against personal beliefs, religious beliefs, political beliefs, etc., it takes humility to examine those beliefs and say, I'm wrong. People who are open and curious tend to be more willing to do that. And that's my goal here. To open people up, to excite their curiosity and their wonder, to spark that little bit of realization in their brains that science is more than what you hear on the news. What the latest debate is about, science is everywhere and it shapes and molds the world around us in fascinating ways. Thus, LuxeSci, taking 2 apparently completely incongruent worlds and smashing them together to highlight that science drives everything about them, from the color of a sapphire to the bouquet of a glass of champagne to the reason why we fall for style trends. I am not an expert in most of what I talk about on this podcast. I am curious and open and so excited to learn about the ins and outs of our podcast topics. And my hypothesis is that some of my excitement and curiosity will rub off on the listeners, you all, hopefully causing you to be a bit more curious too. Can we capture that excitement of learning something new together? Can we inspire each other to remain intellectually honest and learning the beautiful intricacies and fun facts behind the objects we love or covet? I hope that you'll come along with me on the journey and share in that excitement and discovery and realize that science isn't scary or intimidating. It is complex and beautiful and wondrous. And my greatest hope is that something you learn here will spark you to try and find out more, to awaken your own inner curiosity. So join in all the luxuriously scientific fun, no lab coat required, and come be curious with me.